In this video, I'm going to explain what multiband compression is and how to use it in your mixes. So a multiband compressor is a compressor that splits your audio into multiple frequency bands, normally 2 to 6 frequency bands, and allows you to control them independently of each other. Now, it's important you do understand what EQ and compression are exactly, and I'll leave a link in the description to the videos where I cover those two if you're not sure. But essentially, a frequency band is a section of the audible frequencies from 0 Hertz to 20,000 Hertz that you would find on an EQ plugin, and compression, a compressor, is a plugin that allows you to reduce the level of a signal that goes over a certain threshold. So if you're dividing a signal into 4 separate frequency bands, say you've got the first frequency bands, you've got your lows, your bass, then the second one your low mids, and then your high mids, and then your highs, you could compress each of those separate frequency bands independently of each other. So if you had a really dynamic sort of a low end, really dynamic bass and kick, you could compress that more harshly than you would compress your top end, or you could even just compress the low end and not affect the dynamics of the highs at all. And it can be really powerful in a lot of ways when you're mixing. So say you have a vocal recording, and on just some of the words, there's a really kind of boxiness or nasaliness around the mids, but it's not on all of the words. So you don't want to just EQ that section out. You don't want to cut the frequencies for the entire vocal. You just want to do it when that sort of frequency gets too loud. So with the multiband compressor, you could hone in on that specific frequency, and when that frequency gets too loud, then the compressor will kick in and squash it down. And we'll see exactly how that works in the next part. You'll see it in action. And you could use that in addition to your standard vocal compression, for example. Or it can be great for getting a good balance over a whole mix or a whole section. So say you have a drum kit, and you just want to even things out. You could set an equal ratio, an equal threshold, so that when a certain portion of the frequency spectrum gets really boomy, for example, let's say you've got a floor tom and a kick at the same time, it'll just push that down a little bit but not affect the rest. Or if it gets really trebly, the same thing. So let's take a look at a multiband compression, and I'm going to show you all the settings and how they work so you get a good understanding before we dive into a mix and get it to work with using one. So if you're familiar with both what an EQ and a compressor look like, then you'll be sort of familiar with what you're seeing here. So we've got an EQ here. You can see your frequency the frequencies at the bottom going from 16 to 16K and above. And you've got your frequency bands, just like an EQ. But then down here, you've got 6 separate compressors that are compressing these frequency bands independently of each other. And you'll see each compressor has the typical settings that you would find on an individual compressor. So you've got the threshold like you'd see on any compressor plugin. That's the limit, the kind of ceiling, that when the audio goes over that ceiling, that's when it's going to start pushing it down, and not before that. So you can see if you take a look at that orange section, that's what we're controlling here. If we put that threshold right up, it's not compressing it because the audio signal is not reaching it. Bring it down so it's in range, and it's going to start pushing down that signal. And then we've got the range there, or the ratio, it might be labeled on yours. That's how much it's going to be pushing it down by. So it's going to be, if I've set it to -8, it's going to be pushing that signal down by a maximum of 8 decibels. And then we've got the attack, how quickly it kicks in once the signal goes over that threshold. And then the release, how quickly the compressor resets back to normal after the signal's gone back below that threshold. So there's a lot going on here, but it's actually really simple because it's just the same thing duplicated 6 times, or it might be 4 or 8 on yours, depending on the plugin. Then we've also got these solo and bypass buttons, which are great for listening to exactly what a certain band is doing. So if we play these drums, and all we're hearing is what's below 86 Hertz there. And then we've also got a bypass setting, which is going to allow you to only use one of the bands. So if we only want to be compressing the mids, only this compressor here is going to be doing any work. And then with a multi-band compressor, you'll also have the option to change these bands. So at the moment, they're just set to more or less the default that this plugin opens with. So the first band is covering everything up to 86 Hertz. Then this middle band is covering everything from 86 to 4000. And there's some crossover here. So it doesn't just drop off. You can see with these dotted lines there, it's going to be affecting the frequencies either side of that band a little bit as well. And then again, we've got 4 to about 10k for this band, and then 10k up for this band. But you can change these around depending on what your mix needs. And then in this plugin, the C6, we've also got these 2 floating band pass filters as well, which can be great for sort of honing in on specific frequencies. And let's just bring that up so you can see what's going on. And we can change the Q on these to widen or narrow things. And then your compressor will also likely have makeup gain. So if, for example, a compressor's pushing a signal down by around 2 decibels, you could then crank up the gain on that by 2 decibels so that you can make up for it, so you're not adjusting so you're not messing up your level balance that you made. And then we've got an overall output as well to adjust the overall signal that's coming out of the plugin. So those are the main parameters that you're going to find in a multi-band compressor. Let's dive into the mix and hear what it sounds like in action. So before we dive into something a little bit more musical, I just want to show you this example that's going to make it really clear exactly what the multi-band compressor is doing. So I've just got a podcast here, just some people talking, and then I've got this sine wave underneath it. Let's solo that. It's very loud.
Before, and then he popped in a couple deals, and it was like, wow.
And then we've got people talking. That's really overpowering. Obviously, this is very unlikely that you'd get a recording with such a nasty bit of background noise, but I just want to show you exactly what this is doing. So I've put a low pass filter on there. So that sine wave is pretty much just really low end signal, and this is all going through. So the voice and this sine wave is all going through this multi-band compressor, and I've soloed this low end band. And what that's doing is everything below around 195 hertz, with a bit of a curve there, is going to be dropping it by minus 24 decibels. Now, obviously, the vocals are going to be containing frequencies from much higher than that as well, all across the frequency band. So, what this should do is pretty much cut out most of that sine wave without affecting the vocals too much. Let's see. So if we turn that off first.
Typically, these people were, probably first in, last out type, classic recruitment kind of working hours. But those 2 things do stick with me. I think.
And there we go. So you can hear the vocals thin out a little bit because the vocals do contain some of those low frequencies, but it's mostly just affecting the sine wave, and it's dropping it by 24 dB. So in situations like that, when you're mixing, if you've got some kind of rumbliness or nasty, really low-end noise, you can use it to cut that out. But that can be applied to anything. So if you've got a bass that certain notes have a really kind of throbby low end, you could apply just a low band on your multi-band compressor and reduce that as and when needed. Now let's take a look at some more musical examples. So in this example, I've got a bass here in a mix, and I want to just kind of tighten things up and help sort of glue the 2 recordings together. We've got a DI and an amped recording. Let's just take a quick look without the compressor on. We've got all of these bands bypassed. And it gets a little bit throbby on some of the notes, and I don't want to just cut a chunk of low mids out. I want it to be relative to how much low mid energy there is at any particular time. So let me just solo this first so you can hear what's going on. Kind of a grungy, saturated bass. So let's bring in that low mid band. I've set that from about 100 to 500. and we've got about up to 10 dB of gain reduction, but it's not going anywhere near there. And you can hear this, but you can see it as well. On those low notes, you can see that it's dropping it by a good 2-3 dB, and then those two little high notes at the end of the riff, you can see it's barely moving the compressor at all. Just there. So it's really pushing it down there. So it depends on how much of that signal is coming in between 100 and 500 hertz. And then I want to add this low band in as well. That's just going to be controlling this low end. Let's give it a little bit more, but compress it. So we're doing that makeup gain, so it's not reducing the overall how much low end there is. It's just controlling it. If we play it in context now. So it's keeping those low mids from getting a little bit too boxy and throbby at the bottom there. But it's keeping things sounding punchy and warm. But there are countless other ways you can use multiband compressors in your mixes. Just depends on the situation, but it's a great tool to have and to get to know. If you have any questions at all, just leave them in the comments section below. And for more mixing tips and tutorials, just hit that subscribe button. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.